Billionaire yelled at the black waitress, "Kneel down and clean my shoes." Her response stunned everybody. The night Alexander Whitmore demanded a black waitress kneel and clean his shoes, he had no idea he was about to meet the woman who would either save his soul or destroy everything he'd built with $12 billion. When Alexander Whitmore ordered Jasmine Washington to kneel in that crowded Virginia restaurant, he thought his $12 billion made him untouchable. He never imagined that 37 seconds later, she'd be the one bringing him to his knees, and that he'd spend the rest of his life grateful she did. Before we get soaked into this story, please let me know in the comment where you are watching from. Hit subscribe if you are hooked in and ready to enjoy the story. Because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I do want you to miss it for anything. Now let's get into the story. The glass conference room on the 42nd floor overlooked downtown Manhattan as Alexander Whitmore III signed another acquisition deal with the casual indifference of a man buying coffee. At 38, he commanded a business empire worth $12 billion, yet satisfaction remained as elusive as the approval his late father had never given. His Armani suit cost more than most people's cars. His Patek Philippe watch cost more than their homes. But neither could fill the hollow ache that had consumed him since childhood. "Sir, your reservation at Le Bernardin has been moved to 8, his assistant whispered. Alexander didn't look up from his phone. People were interchangeable, assistants, board members, women who threw themselves at his bank account. None had ever seen past the money to whatever remained of the scared boy who'd grown up poor in rural Virginia before his tech startup changed everything. That boy felt like a stranger now, buried under layers of wealth and calculated cruelty. 40 miles away in Richmond, Jasmine Washington tied her apron with practiced efficiency, transforming from graduate student to waitress in 30 seconds. At 29, she possessed 2 master's degrees, one in education, another in social work, but student loans and her grandmother's medical bills meant serving overpriced steaks to people who wouldn't meet her eyes. Table 12 wants extra attention, her manager Terry warned. Some tech billionaire. Big spender if you keep him happy. Jasmine's jaw tightened. She'd grown up in Richmond's East End, where her grandmother had cleaned houses for families who treated her like furniture. Nana had taught her that dignity couldn't be purchased or stolen. It lived in how you carried yourself when the world tried to make you small. "I treat everyone with respect," she said quietly. "That's what professional service means." The Hampton Inn's restaurant buzzed with Friday evening energy, but Jasmine moved with purposeful grace between tables, her natural warmth making even difficult customers smile. She'd learned to read people quickly. The lonely businessman who needed conversation with his coffee, the anniversary couple who wanted to be left alone, the nervous first date pair who required gentle guidance through the wine list. What she couldn't read was the storm approaching in the form of Alexander Whitmore, who'd just discovered his private jet needed emergency maintenance and would be stranded in Richmond overnight. His mood, already sour from a failed merger, darkened further when his driver deposited him at what he considered a budget hotel. Jasmine watched him enter. Expensive everything, phone permanently attached to his ear, the particular brand of arrogance that came with never hearing the word no. She'd served his type before, men who measured their worth by how many people they could diminish. "I need your best table, not this booth," Alexander snapped at Terry, not bothering to lower his voice. "And tell your staff I don't have time for incompetence tonight." From across the dining room, Jasmine felt a familiar chill. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Some folks think money makes them better than breathing air, baby girl. Don't let them steal your light." She straightened her shoulders and approached his table, professional smile in place, unaware that this encounter would unravel both their carefully constructed worlds. What assumptions do we make about people based on first impressions, and how might those snap judgments blind us to deeper truths? Jasmine approached table 12 with the measured grace her grandmother had taught her. Head high, shoulders back, dignity intact. Alexander barely glanced up from his phone as she set down the leather-bound menu, his fingers dancing across the screen with the urgency of a man who believed the world revolved around his schedule. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Hampton Inn's restaurant. Can I start you with something to drink? Macallan 25. Neat. And I want your sommelier to select a bottle of wine, something that costs more than you make in a month." His eyes never left his phone screen. "I'm expecting important calls, so don't interrupt unless the place is on fire." Jasmine's professional smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'll be right back with your whiskey, sir." She returned moments later, setting the crystal tumbler down with practiced precision. Alexander was deep in a heated phone conversation, his voice rising with each word. "I don't care what the board thinks, Johnson. Buy them out or crush them. I don't have time for sentiment in business." He gestured impatiently at Jasmine without looking at her. "Yes, I'm stuck in some godforsaken Virginia hotel because of mechanical issues." Jasmine waited quietly, notepad ready, watching other diners glance over with obvious discomfort at his volume and tone. A young couple at the neighboring table shifted uncomfortably as Alexander's language grew more colorful. "Sir," she ventured softly when he paused. "Are you ready to order?" Alexander's head snapped up, his pale blue eyes cold with irritation. "Did I say I was ready? When I want food, I'll tell you. Until then, make yourself invisible." The words hung in the air like a slap. Around them, conversations quieted as other patrons turned to stare. Jasmine felt heat rise in her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "Of course, sir. I'll check back in a few minutes." 20 minutes passed. Alexander's phone calls grew louder, his language more abusive toward whoever was on the other end. When Jasmine approached again, he was berating someone about quarterly projections, his whiskey glass empty. "Another Macallan," he barked without looking up, then continued his call. "Fire him. I don't care if he has kids. Results matter, not sob stories." Jasmine returned with his drink, setting it down as he ended another call. "Sir, would you like to hear tonight's specials?" Alexander finally looked at her, really looked, his gaze traveling from her face down to her worn but polished shoes, then back up with undisguised disdain. Something shifted in his expression, a cruel calculation that made Jasmine's skin crawl. "You know what I'd like." His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than his shouting. "I'd like to not be served by someone who obviously doesn't belong in a place that caters to people of quality." The restaurant fell silent. Even the kitchen sounds seemed to pause. Alexander stood slowly, his considerable height making him tower over Jasmine. His voice carried across the now quiet dining room with deliberate cruelty. "I spilled something on my shoe." He pointed down at his spotless Italian leather. "Kneel down and clean it. Now." The silence stretched like a held breath. Every eye in the restaurant fixed on them, some horrified, others recording with their phones. Jasmine felt the weight of history in that moment. Generations of her ancestors who'd been forced to their knees by men who looked exactly like Alexander Whitmore. Her hands trembled slightly, but when she spoke, her voice rang clear and strong across the silent restaurant. "Sir, I will not kneel for you or anyone else." She met his shocked gaze directly. "But I will tell you what I will do." She moved closer, close enough that only he could hear her next words, her voice carrying a quiet power that made him lean in despite himself. "I will pray for you tonight, because any man who needs to humiliate a working woman to feel powerful is already on his knees. He just doesn't know it yet." Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'll ask my manager to assign you a different server. I hope the rest of your evening is exactly what you deserve." She turned and walked away with the same dignity she'd carried when she arrived, leaving Alexander standing alone in a room full of strangers who now saw him exactly as he was. For the first time in 20 years, Alexander Whitmore had no words. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone's true character was revealed under pressure, and how did it change your perception of them? Alexander stood frozen in the suffocating silence, his face burning under the collective stare of 43 strangers whose phones were undoubtedly uploading his humiliation to social media. The weight of Jasmine's words, "He's already on his knees," echoed in his head like a death knell. He grabbed his phone, desperate for the familiar armor of importance. "Johnson, I need you to." "Mr. Whitmore?" Terry, the manager, appeared at his elbow with the cautious approach of someone defusing a bomb. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately?" "There's nothing to discuss." Alexander's voice cracked slightly. "That woman was insubordinate. I want her fired immediately, or I'll make sure this place loses every corporate account in the tri-state area." But even as the threats spilled out, they felt hollow. The power that had always flowed through his words seemed to have evaporated, leaving behind only the desperate bluster of a man who'd been seen too clearly. In the staff break room, Jasmine sat with her head in her hands, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and suppressed rage. Her coworker Monica rubbed her shoulder gently. "Girl, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. But Terry's going to have to let you go. You know that, right?" Jasmine nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. She thought of her grandmother's medical bills, the student loans, and the rent due next week. Standing up to Alexander might have cost her everything she couldn't afford to lose. "I couldn't kneel," she whispered finally. "I just couldn't." "Nobody's asking you to explain," Monica said firmly. "What he did was evil. Pure evil." Terry knocked and entered, his expression grim. "Jasmine, I'm sorry. He's threatening to destroy us if I don't." "I know." She stood, untying her apron with steady hands. "I understand." But as she gathered her purse, her phone buzzed with notifications. Then buzzed again. And again. Someone had posted the video. Alexander discovered this 30 minutes later when his assistant called in a panic. "Sir, you're trending on Twitter. The hashtag is #Neilgate, and it's not good." Back in his hotel room, Alexander watched the video loop endlessly, his face contorted with entitled rage, Jasmine's quiet dignity in the face of his cruelty. The comments were brutal, but it was the retweets that terrified him. Millions of them. His phone rang incessantly, reporters, board members, his publicist hyperventilating about crisis management. "This will blow over," he told himself, pouring another whiskey. "People forget everything in a week." But deep down, he knew this was different. Something about the way she'd looked at him, not with hatred or fear, but with something far worse, pity. As if she could see straight through his wealth and success to the frightened, hollow man beneath. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat in her small apartment, overwhelmed by the flood of support pouring in through social media. Job offers, donations, interview requests. The response was staggering. Her phone rang constantly, but she let most calls go to voicemail. "You've become a symbol," her best friend Keisha said, scrolling through the endless comments of support. "People are calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero," Jasmine replied quietly. "I just refuse to be degraded." "That's exactly what makes you a hero." But Jasmine felt no triumph, only a profound sadness. She kept thinking about the look in Alexander's eyes during those final seconds. Not the arrogance or cruelty, but something deeper. A flash of genuine shock, as if he'd never truly seen himself before. "He looked lost," she murmured. "Girl, don't you dare start feeling sorry for that man," Keisha warned. "He showed you exactly who he is." Alexander tried to lose himself in work, but for the first time in his life, business felt meaningless. Every meeting, every deal, every interaction was colored by the memory of Jasmine's unwavering gaze. His board was demanding damage control. His PR team had drafted apologies he couldn't bring himself to approve because they felt like lies. Late that night, unable to sleep, he found himself researching her. Jasmine Washington, 29, 2 master's degrees, Dean's List, volunteer work at homeless shelters. She'd been supporting her grandmother through cancer treatment while working 3 jobs and maintaining a 4.0 GPA. He'd attacked a woman who'd accomplished more with nothing than he'd done with everything. The thought made him physically sick. By morning, both their lives had irreversibly changed. Alexander faced the first real consequences he'd ever encountered, while Jasmine grappled with unwanted fame and a choice that would define her future. Neither could stop thinking about the other, though for vastly different reasons. He was haunted by shame, She was troubled by an inexplicable sense that she'd witnessed something deeper than mere cruelty. A man so lost he'd forgotten how to be human. The video continued to spread, carrying their story far beyond that Richmond restaurant, setting in motion events that would force them to confront not just each other, but themselves. 3 days after the incident, fate intervened in the most unlikely way. Alexander sat in Richmond's federal courthouse, summoned for jury duty, a civic obligation his lawyers had somehow failed to defer. The irony wasn't lost on him that his attempts to flee Richmond had been thwarted by a winter storm that grounded all flights. He slouched in the back row of the jury assembly room, baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses on despite being indoors. The video had made him recognizable in the worst possible way, and he'd already endured whispered comments and pointed stares from other potential jurors. When Jasmine walked in 20 minutes later, clutching her jury summons, Alexander's stomach dropped. She'd received the same random selection notice, and like him, had no choice but to appear. Their eyes met across the crowded room. For a moment, time suspended itself. Jasmine's expression shifted from surprise to something unreadable, while Alexander felt the familiar burn of shame that had plagued him for 3 sleepless nights. She chose a seat in the front row, pointedly ignoring him. Alexander spent the next hour staring at the back of her head, remembering fragments of their encounter that had grown more mortifying with each replay. Case number 2025, CV, 1847, the clerk announced. Washington versus Richmond Medical Center. Medical malpractice. Estimated trial length, 1 week. Alexander barely registered the details until he heard Jasmine's sharp intake of breath. During voir dire, the truth emerged. Jasmine's grandmother, Vivian Washington, had died due to alleged negligence at Richmond Medical Center. Jasmine was suing for wrongful death. Miss Washington, the defense attorney said smoothly, given your emotional involvement in this case, don't you think you might be biased toward the plaintiff? I am the plaintiff, Jasmine replied quietly. My grandmother was the victim. Alexander felt the ground shift beneath him. The woman he'd tried to humiliate was fighting for justice for her grandmother. The same grandmother whose medical bills had forced her to work as a waitress despite her advanced degrees. During the lunch recess, Alexander found himself following Jasmine to the courthouse cafeteria. She sat alone at a corner table, picking at a sad-looking sandwich, her legal documents spread before her. Her lawyer was a young public defender who looked overworked and underprepared. Alexander approached hesitantly. Miss Washington? She looked up, her expression guarded. Mr. Whitmore, are you here to ask me to kneel again, or is this about something else? The words hit him like physical blows. I wanted to apologize. Apologize. She set down her sandwich. For humiliating me in front of a room full of strangers, or for trying to get me fired, or for treating me like I was less than human? All of it. The words came out strangled. I have no excuse. Jasmine studied his face for a long moment. Without arrogance and cruelty, he looked younger, more vulnerable. She could see the boy he must have been before wealth and power had twisted him into something ugly. Sit down, she said finally. Alexander sat across from her, acutely aware of how different this felt from their first encounter. Here, they were equals, just 2 people caught in the machinery of justice. Why are you really here? She asked. I don't know. It was the most honest thing he'd said in years. I can't stop thinking about what you said. About me being on my knees. Jasmine's expression softened slightly. Everyone's on their knees sometimes, Mr. Whitmore. The question is whether you learn something from it. They sat in awkward silence until Alexander noticed her legal documents. You're representing yourself? I can't afford the kind of lawyers your money could buy, she said matter-of-factly. The public defender is doing his best, but this case requires resources I don't have. Alexander felt something crack inside his chest. What happened to your grandmother? For the next 30 minutes, Jasmine told him about Vivian Washington, a woman who'd cleaned houses for 60 years, raised 5 children alone, and taught her granddaughter that dignity was the one thing no one could take away. She'd gone to Richmond Medical for routine surgery and died from complications that should have been easily preventable. She was 78 and had more life in her than people half her age, Jasmine said, her voice thick with grief. They killed her through negligence, then offered me $15,000 to go away quietly. Alexander listened without interrupting, feeling each detail like a knife. This woman, this brilliant, strong, dignified woman, had been serving him food to pay for her grandmother's medical bills while grieving and preparing for a legal battle she couldn't possibly win alone. The hospital has a team of corporate lawyers, she continued. They're going to bury me in paperwork and technicalities. But I have to try. I owe her that much. When she finished speaking, Alexander sat in stunned silence. Finally, he spoke. I could help. Jasmine's head snapped up. What? I know lawyers. Good ones. The best ones. He leaned forward, urgency creeping into his voice. I could make some calls, ensure you have proper representation. Why would you do that? Alexander met her eyes, and for the first time in their acquaintance, spoke from his heart. Because I've spent 3 days seeing myself through your eyes, and I don't like what I see. Maybe helping you would be a start toward becoming someone different. Jasmine stared at him for a long moment, weighing his words against her memories of his cruelty. I don't trust you, Mr. Whitmore. I don't blame you, he said quietly. But your grandmother deserves justice, regardless of what you think of me. Outside, snow continued to fall, trapping them both in Richmond for another day, another chance to discover who they might become when stripped of their assumptions about each other. The next morning, Alexander arrived at the courthouse carrying 2 coffee cups and a manila folder thick with legal documents. He found Jasmine on the courthouse steps, checking her phone with a frown. My public defender just called in sick, she said without preamble when she saw him approach. Convenient timing, considering the hospital's lawyers filed 3 new motions yesterday. Alexander handed her one of the coffees. I made those calls. Jasmine looked at him suspiciously. What calls? Harrison, Kessler and Associates. They're the best medical malpractice firm on the East Coast. They've agreed to take your case pro bono. He paused. I also hired a private investigator to dig into Richmond Medical's history. There are patterns, other cases that were settled quietly. I told you I don't want your charity, Jasmine said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's not charity. It's justice. And maybe, he struggled with the words, maybe it's the first decent thing I've done in 20 years. They sat on the courthouse steps as Alexander opened the folder. Inside were investigative reports, medical records, and testimonies from other families who'd lost loved ones to Richmond Medical's negligence. The evidence was damning. How did you get all this so quickly? Jasmine asked, scanning the documents. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Money opens doors. I've spent my entire adult life using it as a weapon, but for once, he looked up at her. For once, maybe it can be a tool for something good. Jasmine studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw, the shadows under his eyes. You haven't been sleeping. Neither have you. She couldn't deny it. The video had brought media attention she hadn't wanted, and the lawsuit consumed her every waking moment. But there was something else keeping her awake, the haunted look in Alexander's eyes that final night at the restaurant. Can I ask you something? She said carefully. What made you so angry that night? And don't say it was just business stress. Alexander's hands tightened around his coffee cup. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, almost inaudibly, you reminded me of someone. Who? He stood abruptly, walking to the edge of the steps. My mother. Jasmine waited, sensing the weight of whatever he was about to share. She was a waitress, he said finally. Worked at a diner in rural Virginia when I was growing up. We lived in a trailer park, and she worked double shifts to keep food on the table after my father left. His voice grew thick. I used to be ashamed of her, ashamed of where we came from. The admission hung between them like a confession in church. When I started making money, I tried to help her. Bought her a house, offered to pay for her to stop working. But she refused. said work gave her dignity. He laughed bitterly. I thought she was being stubborn. I thought dignity was something poor people told themselves to feel better about having nothing. Jasmine felt something shift in her chest. What happened to her? She died 5 years ago. Heart attack at work, serving coffee to people who probably never learned her name. His voice broke slightly. The last conversation we had was an argument. I told her she was embarrassing me by still working as a waitress when her son was worth billions. The pieces clicked into place for Jasmine. So when you saw me, I saw her, and I hated what that made me remember about myself. He turned to face her, his eyes red-rimmed. I became exactly the kind of person who would have made my mother feel small. The kind of person she served with a smile while they treated her like she was invisible. Jasmine felt tears prick her eyes. Alexander, don't, he said quickly. Don't pity me. I made my choices. I became a monster because it was easier than staying human. They sat in silence as snow continued to fall around them. Finally, Jasmine spoke. My grandmother used to say that hurt people. But she also said that broken people can choose to heal instead of break others. I don't know how to heal, Alexander admitted. I've been broken for so long, I forgot what it felt like. Jasmine reached out tentatively and touched his hand. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through both of them. Maybe that's why we're here. Both of us. Maybe we're supposed to help each other figure it out. Alexander stared down at their joined hands. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't about what you deserve, she said softly. It's about what I choose to give. And right now, I choose to believe that the man who's helping me fight for my grandmother's justice is who you really are underneath all that pain. For the first time since his mother's death, Alexander felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door that had been locked for years finally admitting light. Jasmine, he said, her name feeling different on his lips now. I want to be better. I want to be the man my mother raised before I forgot how. She squeezed his hand. Then be better. Starting right now. Inside the courthouse, lawyers were preparing for battle. Outside, 2 wounded souls began the tentative process of healing, not just their own hearts, but each other's. How do we learn to forgive ourselves for the people we've become and find the courage to become who we were meant to be? The next 3 days blurred together in an unexpected rhythm of shared purpose. Alexander had rented a conference room at the Hampton Inn, the same hotel where their story began, and transformed it into a war room for Jasmine's case. Legal documents covered every surface, and the walls were lined with evidence boards that looked like something from a crime drama. You know this is insane, right? Jasmine said, entering the room with Chinese takeout to find Alexander hunched over depositions at 2 in the morning. Most billionaires don't personally review medical records. Most billionaires don't have the chance to undo the worst thing they've ever done, he replied without looking up. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but there was an energy about him she'd never seen before, focused, determined, almost desperate. She set down the food and studied him. When's the last time you slept? Sleep is overrated. He gestured to a stack of papers. But look at this, Dr. Morrison. The surgeon who operated on your grandmother has been cited for similar complications in 4 other cases. The hospital buried the reports. Jasmine sat beside him, close enough to smell his cologne mixed with exhaustion and determination. Alexander, you're going to make yourself sick. Something in her voice made him look up. For a moment, their faces were inches apart, and the air between them crackled with an awareness they'd both been trying to ignore. Why do you care? He asked softly. The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Jasmine pulled back slightly, but didn't break eye contact. Because, she said carefully, I've watched you transform into someone I never expected, and that person matters to me. The admission surprised them both. Alexander reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing her cheek. Jasmine, don't, she whispered, but she didn't pull away. This is complicated enough. Everything about this is complicated. His thumb traced her jawline. A week ago, I was the worst version of myself. Now I'm sitting here at 2 a.m., fighting for justice with the woman I tried to destroy, and I can't remember ever feeling more alive. Before either could think better of it, they were kissing, soft, tentative, then deeper as weeks of tension and transformation poured into the moment. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "This is crazy," Jasmine whispered against his lips. "Completely insane," he agreed, pulling her closer. They spent the next hour not working on the case, but talking. Really talking. Alexander told her about his childhood, about watching his mother smile at customers who treated her poorly, about the shame that had driven him to build walls of money and cruelty. Jasmine shared memories of her grandmother's wisdom, her own struggles with feeling invisible in spaces dominated by wealth and privilege. "Nana used to say that love finds you when you're busy becoming who you're supposed to be," Jasmine said, curled against Alexander's shoulder on the conference room couch. "Smart woman," Alexander murmured into her hair. "I wish I could have met her. She would have seen right through you from day one," Jasmine laughed. "But she also would have seen the good in you that I'm just starting to understand." They fell asleep like that, surrounded by legal documents and evidence of corporate negligence, but wrapped in something that felt like hope. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Harrison, Kessler and Associates had uncovered a smoking gun. Internal emails showing Richmond medical administrators knew about Dr. Morrison's pattern of errors, but covered them up to avoid bad publicity. "This is it," lead attorney Patricia Harrison announced over a video call. "With this evidence, they'll settle. Probably for more than your grandmother's life insurance policy would have paid." But Jasmine shook her head. "I don't want just money. I want accountability. I want them to admit what they did publicly, so it doesn't happen to another family." Alexander watched her with admiration and something deeper. Here was a woman who could have taken an easy settlement and walked away, but instead chose the harder path because it was right. "That's going to mean a public trial," Patricia warned. "Media attention, depositions, months of litigation." "I'm not afraid of the truth," Jasmine said firmly. "My grandmother deserves nothing less." After the call ended, Alexander pulled her into his arms. "You're incredible, you know that?" "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But I feel like she's watching, like she approves of what we're doing." Jasmine looked up at him, seeing not the cruel billionaire from that first night, but a man who'd found his way back to his humanity through helping her fight for justice. "Yes, if you want to be." Instead of answering with words, Alexander kissed her again, pouring years of loneliness and newfound purpose into the connection between them. When they broke apart, both knew they'd crossed a line they couldn't cross. "I love you," Alexander said suddenly, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I know it's too soon, I know it's impossible, but I love you, Jasmine Washington. You saved my life without even trying." Tears filled her eyes. "Alexander, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know that whatever happens with the trial, whatever comes next, you gave me back my soul." Jasmine cupped his face in her hands, studying the man who'd somehow transformed from her worst nightmare into her greatest hope. "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me, I love you too." Outside, Richmond hummed with early morning traffic, but inside their makeshift war room, two people who'd found each other in the darkest circumstances held tight to something that felt like forever. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on the morning of the trial's opening statements. Jasmine was in the shower when her phone started buzzing incessantly. Alexander, who'd been staying in the adjoining hotel room to maintain propriety, heard it through the thin walls and knocked urgently. "Jasmine, your phone." She emerged wrapped in a towel, hair dripping, and grabbed the phone to see 12 missed calls from Patricia Harrison. The lawyer's voice was tight with barely controlled fury when Jasmine called back. "The judge just granted Richmond Medical's motion to dismiss. All charges dropped. Case closed." The words hit Jasmine like a physical blow. "What? How is that possible? We had them dead to rights. Someone got to Judge Morrison. I don't know how, but overnight our smoking gun evidence was ruled inadmissible. Chain of custody issues, they claim. And without those emails, The phone slipped from Jasmine's numb fingers. Alexander, who'd been listening from the doorway, felt ice flood his veins. Judge Morrison. The same last name as Dr. Morrison, the surgeon. His phone was already buzzing. His assistant's panicked voice filled the room. Sir, I need to tell you something about the Richmond medical case. About what the board authorized last night. Alexander's world tilted. What are you talking about? The emergency board meeting at midnight. They voted to exercise your emergency powers clause. They made a contribution to Judge Morrison's re-election campaign. A substantial one. And they may have mentioned your personal involvement in the case. The phone fell from Alexander's hand as the full horror crashed over him. His own company, his own board, had bribed the judge. And they'd done it using his authority, his money, his name. Jasmine stared at him, reading the guilt and devastation on his face. What did you do? I didn't. Jasmine, I swear I didn't know. But even as he said it, Alexander realized how it looked. How it would always look. You're a billionaire who suddenly develops a conscience about a medical malpractice case, she said slowly, her voice becoming dangerously quiet. A case that threatens a hospital in a city where you have business interests. And overnight, magically, that case disappears. Jasmine, please, you have to believe me. I would never. Wouldn't you? Her voice cracked like a whip. A week ago you tried to make me kneel in front of a room full of people. Why should I believe you wouldn't destroy my case to protect your investments? Alexander felt panic clawing at his throat. Because I love you. Because these past days, helping you fight for your grandmother's justice. It's the only good thing I've done in years. Love. Jasmine laughed bitterly, the sound sharp enough to cut. You think this is love? You think sleeping with me while your people bought off the judge's love? I didn't know. Jasmine, I swear on my mother's grave, I didn't know. But the damage was done. Jasmine was backing away from him, her eyes filling with tears of rage and betrayal that cut him deeper than any physical wound. Your mother. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The waitress you were ashamed of. The woman you said I reminded you of. Is that what this was? Some sick way to assuage your guilt by playing savior to another working-class woman. No, that's not. Get out. The words exploded from her with such force that Alexander physically recoiled. Get out of my room. Get out of my life. Get out of my city. Jasmine, please let me fix this. I can make this right. How? Tears were streaming down her face now. How do you make this right? My grandmother is still dead. The people who killed her are walking free. And I'm just another fool who trusts a rich man who sees poor people as entertainment. Alexander tried to approach her, but she held up a hand that stopped him cold. I defended you, she said, her voice breaking. When my friends said you were just using me, when social media said this was all an act, I defended you. I told them you'd changed. I told them I saw something real in you. You did. What we have is real. What we have, she said with deadly precision, is a waitress who forgot her place and a billionaire who needed a new toy. That's what everyone said from the beginning, and I was too stupid to see they were right. She grabbed her clothes and headed for the bathroom. When I come out, I want you gone. Don't call me, don't text me, don't send your lawyers or your money or your guilt. Just disappear back to whatever gilded tower you crawled out of. Jasmine. The bathroom door slammed with such finality that it felt like a coffin closing. Alexander stood alone in the room they'd shared their hopes and dreams, surrounded by the evidence boards they'd built together, the Chinese takeout containers from their late-night strategy sessions, the couch where they'd fallen asleep in each other's arms. His phone buzzed with more calls, reporters, board members, lawyers. The story was already breaking. Billionaire's secret romance with Waitress he humiliated exposed as legal strategy gone wrong. By noon, the narrative would be set in stone. Alexander Whitmore, master manipulator, had seduced the woman he'd publicly humiliated as part of an elaborate scheme to derail her lawsuit against his business interests. The truth, that he'd genuinely fallen in love, that he'd found redemption in helping her seek justice, would be buried under layers of cynicism and circumstantial evidence. As Alexander gathered his things with trembling hands, he realized he'd lost everything that had ever truly mattered to him. Jasmine's trust, her love, and his one chance at becoming the man he'd glimpsed in her eyes. The boy his mother had raised was gone forever, and the monster had won. Alexander sat in his penthouse office in Manhattan, staring at the Richmond skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. 3 weeks had passed since the case dismissal. 3 weeks since Jasmine had thrown him out of her life. 3 weeks of living in a hell entirely of his own making. The media storm had been brutal but brief. Billionaire romance scandal had dominated headlines for exactly 5 days before the news cycle moved on to fresher meat. His board was pleased. The Richmond medical situation had been handled with minimal damage to company stock prices. But Alexander felt like he was dying by degrees. His assistant knocked tentatively. "Sir, your 3 o'clock is here." "Cancel it." "Sir, it's the mayor of Richmond. About the development project." "I said cancel it." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Cancel everything. Cancel the Richmond project. Cancel the medical center investments. Cancel all of it." Through his assistant's shocked silence, Alexander's phone buzzed with a news alert. Local Waitress turned activist Jasmine Washington announces new foundation to help families fight medical malpractice. His chest tightened as he read the article. Jasmine had used the settlement money from a wrongful dismissal lawsuit against the restaurant to start a nonprofit. She was giving legal aid to families who couldn't afford to fight corporate medical negligence. She was still fighting, still being the person his mother had raised him to be, before money had poisoned his soul. 2 floors below, in his legal department, Alexander's team was celebrating another successful case closure when he walked in unannounced. "Which one of you did it?" His voice cut through their conversation like a blade. The room fell silent. Senior partner James Mitchell cleared his throat. "Sir, I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Richmond Medical." "Judge Morrison. Which one of you authorized the bribe?" Mitchell's face went pale. "Mr. Whitmore, we prefer the term strategic campaign contribution, and it was well within the legal parameters of." Alexander's fist slammed into the conference table with such force that coffee cups jumped. "I didn't ask for legal justification. I asked who made the call." "You did, sir." The voice came from the back of the room. Junior Associate Patricia Kim stepped forward, trembling but resolute. "The emergency authorization came through your personal account at 11:47 p.m. Your digital signature was verified." Alexander felt the room spin. "I never signed anything." "Sir," Mitchell said carefully, "you gave the board emergency authority over your personal accounts for rapid response situations. They used that authority when they became aware of your emotional involvement with the plaintiff." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. His own paranoid control systems, designed to protect his empire, had been used to destroy the only thing that had ever mattered to him. "Get out," he whispered. Then louder, "All of you get out." As the lawyers fled, Alexander sank into a chair, his head in his hands. He'd built a machine so efficient at protecting his wealth that it had automatically crushed anyone who threatened it, including the woman he loved. Meanwhile, in Richmond, Jasmine stood in her new office, a cramped space above a sandwich shop that served as headquarters for the Vivian Washington Foundation. The walls were covered with photos of her grandmother and thank you letters from families she'd helped. Her friend Keisha brought coffee and concern. "Girl, you've lost 20 pounds. When's the last time you slept?" "Sleep is overrated," Jasmine replied, echoing words Alexander had once said. The irony wasn't lost on her. "You're killing yourself with work because you're trying not to think about him." Jasmine's hands stilled on the case file she'd been reviewing. "There's nothing to think about. He used me, manipulated me, and when I got too close to the truth, his people destroyed my case." "But do you really believe that?" The question hung in the air. Jasmine had replayed every moment of their time together. His tears when he spoke about his mother, the tenderness in his touch, the way he'd looked at her like she was saving his life. "It doesn't matter what I believe," she said finally. "It matters what he chose when it counted." Back in Manhattan, Alexander made a choice that would define the rest of his life. He called an emergency board meeting and walked into the conference room with a single sheet of paper. "I'm dissolving the emergency authority clause," he announced. "Effective immediately, all major decisions require my personal approval." Board Chairman Harrison frowned. "Alexander, that's incredibly inefficient. I'm also liquidating our medical investments. All of them." The room erupted in protests, but Alexander continued with quiet determination. "The proceeds will go to medical malpractice victims and their families, starting with a $10 million donation to the Vivian Washington Foundation." "You can't be serious," Harrison sputtered. "We'll lose hundreds of millions." "Good." Alexander's voice was steel. "Maybe I'll finally be able to sleep at night." As his board members threatened lawsuits and resignations, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years: peace. For the first time since his mother's death, he was making a choice based on what was right instead of what was profitable. That evening, as snow began to fall over Richmond, Alexander boarded a train south. He didn't know if Jasmine would see him, didn't know if she'd believe him, didn't even know if forgiveness was possible. But he knew he had to try. The man his mother had raised, the man Jasmine had briefly loved, deserved that much. In her small apartment, Jasmine stood at the window watching the snow fall, unaware that somewhere on the highway below, the man who'd broken her heart was racing through the storm to try to earn it back. The Vivian Washington Foundation's holiday fundraiser was in full swing when Alexander arrived. He stood outside the community center, snow dusting his shoulders, watching through frosted windows as Jasmine moved gracefully between donors and families she'd helped. She wore a simple black dress that made her look ethereal in the warm light, her smile genuine as she hugged an elderly woman whose medical bills the foundation had covered. She was radiant, and she was everything he'd lost. Alexander almost turned around 3 times before finally walking through the door. The conversations around him gradually died as people recognized him, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed hostility. But he only had eyes for Jasmine. When she saw him, her face went through a dozen emotions before settling on guarded composure. She excused herself from her conversation and walked over, each step measured and deliberate. "You have some nerve showing up here," she said quietly, mindful of the watching crowd. "I know. I'm sorry. I needed you to know something." "What could you possibly need to tell me that's worth disrupting a fundraiser for medical malpractice victims?" Alexander reached into his coat and pulled out a certified check. $10 million. The first installment. Jasmine stared at the check, then back at him. "First installment of what?" "My entire medical portfolio. I'm liquidating everything: hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, medical device manufacturers. All of it. The proceeds go to foundations like yours." The room had gone completely silent now, every guest straining to hear their conversation. "Why?" Jasmine's voice was barely a whisper. "Because I love you. Because your grandmother deserved justice. Because I've spent 3 weeks dying inside, knowing that my own company, my own systems, destroyed the most important thing in my life." Tears pooled in Jasmine's eyes, but her voice remained steady. "Money can't fix what happened, Alexander. I know, but that's all I have to offer." He pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. "Richmond Medical is under federal investigation. Turns out when you liquidate investments, you lose certain protections. The FBI got access to records they couldn't touch before." Jasmine read the headline: "Richmond Medical CEO arrested in cover-up scandal." Her hand went to her throat. "Dr. Morrison has been suspended pending investigation. 3 families have already filed new suits with evidence the FBI uncovered." Alexander's voice broke slightly. "It won't bring your grandmother back, but maybe other grandmothers will live because of what you started." The crowd around them had pressed closer, phones recording every word. But at that moment, it felt like they were alone in the universe. "You did this," Jasmine said, scanning the article. "You destroyed your own investments to get justice for people you've never met." I did it because a very wise woman once told me that broken people can choose to heal instead of break others. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. You healed me, Jasmine. You showed me who I could be when I'd forgotten there was anything good left in me. A tear slipped down her cheek. Alexander, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I may have lost you forever. But I needed you to know that the man you loved, the man you saw in me, he's real. He's standing here right now, and he will spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of what you gave him. The crowd held its collective breath as Jasmine stared into his eyes, searching for truth in the depths of his soul. What she found there made her heart crack open all over again. Not with pain this time, but with recognition. You fool, she whispered, touching his face with trembling fingers. Don't you know I never stopped loving you? Even when I hated you, even when I was convinced you'd betrayed me, I never stopped loving you. Then give me another chance, he pleaded. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that the man you fell in love with is who I really am. Instead of answering with words, Jasmine did something that stunned everyone in the room, including herself. She knelt down, slowly and deliberately, until she was on one knee before him. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. This was the same position he'd once demanded of her in cruelty and humiliation. Now she chose it freely, in love and forgiveness. Alexander Whitmore, she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. Will you let me help you remember who you were always meant to be? Alexander dropped to his knees in front of her, tears streaming down his face, and pulled her into his arms. Every day for the rest of my life, he whispered against her hair. The room erupted in applause and tears as two people who'd found love in the wreckage of their worst moments held each other like they'd never let go. 6 months later, they married in the same community center where they'd reunited, surrounded by the families whose lives had been changed by the Vivian Washington Foundation. Alexander's wedding gift to his bride wasn't jewelry or property, but a fully endowed medical school scholarship program in her grandmother's name. As they danced to their first song as husband and wife, Jasmine whispered in his ear, Nana would have loved you, you know. The real you. I wish I could have met her, Alexander replied, spinning her gently. You did, Jasmine smiled, touching his heart. Every time you choose love over fear, kindness over cruelty, justice over profit, you meet her. She's in every good choice you make. Looking around at the faces of people whose lives had been touched by their story, former enemies who'd become friends, broken systems that were slowly healing, love that had grown from the darkest soil. Alexander finally understood what his mother had tried to teach him all those years ago. Dignity wasn't about how the world saw you. It was about how you chose to see the world. And love, real love, wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about becoming someone worthy of the love you'd been given. How has witnessing this transformation changed your own perspective on the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds? And what broken parts of yourself might be waiting for the courage to choose healing over hurt?